So, how did you get into the cannabis industry?
Yeah. So I got in the cannabis industry after I did a lot of research. I first tried to understand how the laws worked in each state, and then I realized, I mean, every state is almost like its own country when it comes to cannabis. They have starkly different laws. Even though you kind of see a little bit of consistency from East Coast
Yeah.
versus West
Yeah,
Coast.
yeah.
So, that's the first thing that I did when I decided I wanted to get into the industry. I kind of looked at the laws first from a federal perspective, and then I realized, okay, I kind of have to pick the state
Yeah,
that I want to
yeah.
target and then go and look at those laws specifically. So I read the bill that had been passed in Maryland back in 2014, and I mean, it's like a 600-page document, but that's how I really understood all of the different opportunities that would be
Yeah.
available for me.
Yeah, but did you see yourself doing this from like high school, middle school, or?
Definitely
Yeah,
not. I mean, this wasn't even an industry back then.
yeah,
So, if I saw
yeah,
myself ever doing this before, it was
yeah,
like, I mean, that was an illegal enterprise. I mean,
yeah,
I definitely wasn't thinking that I
yeah.
would ever be doing this. I definitely thought I would run a company, though.
Uh-huh.
I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. But I definitely thought I was going to work my way up and kind of just, do it like on the C-suite executive level and do it kind of, climbing the corporate ladder. That's what I really thought I would do.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it probably didn't even happen how you thought it was going to happen. As far as like, I'm pretty sure you probably had a idea of how getting into the cannabis industry, starting a dispensary, or
Yeah.
did you even think about starting a dispensary first, or was it something else?
So, when I first got
Yeah.
into the industry, I definitely only
Yeah.
thought like, I want to be, I actually thought I wanted to cultivate, process the plant and
Right.
sell,
Right, right.
as a dispensary owner. I wanted to do everything. I wanted to be
Yeah.
a part of the entire supply chain. Now I realize the benefit of being niche and really focusing on one specific part of the supply chain and really getting that down, because if not, then you're like, you're just doing too much, and it's hard to get really good at something if you're doing too many pieces of the supply chain at once.
Gotcha. Now, did you start out by yourself, or did you already have your team before you got into the industry? How did that go?
Yeah, so when I first started, it was just me. It was me trying to figure out how I could penetrate the industry, how I could really get my foot in the door. I realized quickly I needed a strong team that really understood, cannabis from a healthcare perspective, because I realized that's kind of where the industry was at that point. We weren't talking about recreational cannabis in 2014, not really, at least not outside of California. So I knew I would need people that had a strong medical background. The first person I thought of was the strongest entrepreneur I knew at the moment, my mother, who's a dentist and has a biochemistry background. So I went to her. She thought it was an awesome idea. We decided to partner together, and we got a third partner. And the three of us co-founded our now company, Mary and Main. But he is an oral surgeon and also owns his own practice, just like my mother. So they both come from a strong business and healthcare perspective, and then they also really understand compliance, which is also huge in the industry. So I realized very quickly this is not something you can do alone. You definitely need a team, and everyone has to play a specific role.
Gotcha. So your mom's an entrepreneur, so she taught you business, or did you go to college for that? How did?
Yeah, so I got a lot of it at home.
Yeah.
My mother and my father both. My dad is not an entrepreneur, but he also has a degree in business, and my grandmother was an entrepreneur. My great grandmother was an entrepreneur. So I've been taught my whole life about how to build teams
Yeah,
and build
yeah.
culture
Yeah, yeah,
and how to be a leader.
Yeah.
So I definitely got a lot of that at home.
Yeah.
But when I was in school, I went to school and majored in economics. So
What school?
I went to Spelman College.
Okay.
And majored in economics, and then I worked in investment banking. So I think that's where I really got my strong understanding of how companies should be structured and how they should be run, just from an enterprise perspective, not even looking at the industry specifically. I think a lot of people kind of forget that the cannabis industry really
Yeah.
is a sophisticated culture, and it's
Yeah,
a sophisticated
yeah.
sector. It's not
Yeah,
like you're
yeah.
just like selling weed.
Yeah.
It's not like an underground business.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
although, I mean, I definitely think people can transition
Yeah.
from the legacy market,
Yeah.
like I like to call
So
it.
you're saying it's really just a difference of understanding like infrastructure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, how
Yeah.
do you build a company that can scale?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you do that when you have strict regulations around? So that's why people from highly regulated industries can easily transition
Yeah.
to the cannabis industry. Usually,
Yeah.
tobacco, gaming, even some retail. People who are coming from highly regulated industries usually just they can fit right in because they understand how to work around all the red tape.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, they just want to go straight into the cannabis industry, but you can't just go into the cannabis industry. There are things that you got to do first, right?
Yeah,
Like, what are
it
some of those?
depends
Yeah.
on what side of the industry. So I like to break it up with plant touching and then non-plant touching, or the ancillary space. The ancillary space, you can just jump right in. It might not be smart to jump right in without understanding your client base and who you're targeting, because they might have restrictions that might restrict how you can interact with them. But if you want to go on the plant touching side, so meaning you want to own a dispensary, you want to have a cultivation center, you want to process and make infused products or edibles, let's say you want to do any of those things. It's not, like you said, you can't just go open up a store.
Yeah.
You have to either win or acquire some way a license to do so. And every state has their own rules and regulations. Some states are much more difficult to do this than others. Some states have a lottery process where you're literally putting your name in a hat and hoping your name is being pulled out. Some states have a fully competitive limited license situation where there may be 10 licenses available and there's an application process and it's scored. That's how most states are going at this point. There are other states that leave it up to local jurisdiction. So as a state, they'll say, okay, we've legalized cannabis, but each local municipality has the choice on whether or not they want to allow it and how many they want to allow, and if they want to add any extra layer of an application process. So you really have to kind of weed through all those nuances and kind of decide what market you want to go into.
So the barrier to entry is kind of hard.
The barriers are huge. I mean, not to mention, licensing is the biggest barrier. But then when you get past licensing, there are a lot of barriers just within that process itself.
Speaking about licensing, like, what makes it so hard? Like, what's the biggest mistake that most people make when it comes to getting their license?
The biggest mistake people make when it comes to getting their license is underestimating the complexity and the time that it takes. So in my first application process, we applied in November of 2015. That's when the applications were due. We started preparing and getting ready for this application process in 2014. So we spent a year preparing for it. That was not enough time. I think that people really underestimate that. They think, oh, when the application is dropped, it's like, oh, the application's up, it's due in 3 months. I can do this. It's like, no, there have been people that were, have anticipated this 2 years ago, that already have their property figured out, that already have secured their team. They've already secured their funding. These things have already happened long in advance. Really, the regulations that govern the program that you're trying to get into, they show you what the application will look like. As long as you're preparing a company, if there is any bill passed in your state about cannabis, you can begin preparing for the application process at that point. You don't have to wait till an application actually gets dropped, because honestly, if you're waiting till the application gets dropped, oh, you're way too late.
Gotcha. So how does somebody start a cannabis business even though it's federally illegal?
So because it is federally illegal, in each state they license people separately, and if your state it has a process, you can get your license that way. What you can't do once you get your license is ship product over state lines. That's a big no-no. Companies have been shut down because of it, and they lose their licenses because of doing that. So that does become difficult if you're trying to scale, and just because you have a huge production facility in California doesn't mean that that's going to do anything for your business on the East Coast. You're going to have to set up a whole nother production facility in every single state that you're in. So you really have to kind of think of nuanced business models that allow for scale, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the course too.
So how do I know how much money, or how does somebody know how much money they need to actually start and operate a cannabis business?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you need to do is when you go through the regulations, you'll kind of see, all right, It's required that I have XYZ type of security guards, and that I have to have X amount of security
So
cameras.
you gotta have security guards?
Most states do require some sort of on-site security, yes.
So you actually do have to have a security guard there in Maryland, right?
So in Maryland, you're not required to physically have a security on site.
Yeah,
A lot of dispensaries do.
Yeah.
In some states, they actually do. So I worked on an application in Illinois. In Illinois, you must have an armed guard service, and it must be one that's registered with the state of Illinois.
Just during normal business hours?
During normal business hours,
Yeah,
And a lot of cultivation centers and processing centers will have 24-hour security on site.
And do you feel, because I know, something happened with you, if you want to explain it, you can, to where you don't have 24-hour security, right?
No, we don't have 24 hours.
Right, and somebody came in late at night to you guys' dispensary shop.
Yeah. It's really important to secure all entry points. And we knew we had one weak spot, and that's where they got us. And so security for us, the protocol after. First thing we did, of course, is notify the police. I think a lot of times, business owners try and keep things silent. They don't want to tell the authorities. The first thing we did was call the police and, cooperated 100% with them. The second thing we did was call the commission, the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission. We had to notify them immediately. Had we not notified them and then it got back later, that would be us being not in compliance.
Right.
So I think that you have to have protocols in place and SOPs for every scenario, every adverse event. And these are things that actually they ask for in the application process. So they want to know in advance, how would you handle, armed robbery during store hours? And then when it's not store hours, they want to know all of these things. And most of the time, the commission will hold you to your own SOP. So not only do they have their standards that they impose on you, they make you stand by your own, which I really, I like that level of accountability.
So what advice would you give somebody, right? They're 25 years old, 25 plus years old, whatever age it is. They got experience in the corporate world, and they want to get into the cannabis industry. What advice would you give them?
So I think first it's important to understand how sophisticated the industry is getting, and there are so many different ways you can be involved. You don't just have to start a business. You can go into a corporate structure within the industry.
Yeah.
So I tell people to kind of take inventory of your skill sets, look at your resume, look at your skills that aren't on your resume, and see, is there any way that I can tie that into the cannabis industry to make the industry more robust and operate more like like the liquor industry and how sophisticated it's gotten. So, we have full corporate structures in cannabis, and a lot of businesses are startups, but we have some more sophisticated and mature businesses that need all types of business services. So just take inventory of your skill sets and then find a company that fits your culture.
So what about somebody who wants to increase their likelihood of actually getting approved for the license? What can they do? What are some things that they can?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on two things. If your state is already mobilized and your state is already let's say they've already licensed a few companies, I would be really, really diligent in figuring out when is the next application process. When will I have my turn at applying in a license? And I would begin today building a team of people with very specialized talent that have have things that you need to have on an application. And like I said, every state has different requirements. So kind of combing through that and seeing what people have done in the past, and maybe even looking at current companies and the types of people they have on their teams. And I would be trying to build that. Another thing I would be doing is kind of forecasting my business model, because a big piece of this is going to be raising capital. And you need to really understand the finances behind it in order to do it. So I would probably be doing those two things. And then if I lived in a state where they had not legalized cannabis, I would be actively a part of that process. So I would be talking to local government officials and promoting the cannabis industry to be the type of industry that I wanted to see, that was inclusive and allowed for me to have that opportunity. Because a lot of people get shut out because they weren't a part of that regulatory process that dictated how the applications would go. We have that unique opportunity right now.
So have you ever heard of an instance where somebody took an unregulated grow operation and turned it legal?
Not necessarily. I would say really the best way to do it is to shut that all the way down and then start up trying to build a good team. Because, I even see people, they're like, look, I can grow I can grow some fireweed. I got the best strain in America. I'm like, but you've been growing in your mama's basement. Like, I can't write that on my application. So I think a lot of people
actually come to you and tell you that?
Yeah, I mean, all the time people are like, I mean, and they probably really do grow some really good shit, but like, I can't put that on an application.
Right.
So they get angry when they lose out to these people that have, horticulture degrees and things like that. I'm like, that's what we can claim as real experience. I can't claim, Ray y'all got a grow house out somewhere. I can't claim that.
Have you had dope boys or guys or so we come to you and try to partner with you in the beginning?
I think people thought that they could do that, and then I think later they realized, damn, I got to go through. It's like a federal background check. Like this is a big deal, guys. So I think people just like now they've moved on, but. Like, so I have a friend, he owns a dispensary in Oakland. His name is Tucky Blunt. That's his real name. Blunt is his real name. And his partner's last name is Moore. So his store's name is called Blunts and More.
Blunts and More, right.
But yeah, Blunts and More, Tucky is an ex-felon, and he actually got his cannabis charge in Oakland and now is running his dispensary in Oakland. It's super dope. So, I mean, it can be done, but you have to, like, all the way flip to the other side. I mean, and you have to get a team. I'd say if you're flipping to the other side, your team needs to be squeaky clean, and they need to have a lot of experience. They really need to know what they're doing from a business perspective. Maybe you get the culture. Maybe you get the lifestyle. Maybe you even can grow some good stuff. But, like, even if you are going to call yourself, I mean, you probably need a head grower, director of cultivation that has a background in horticulture or botany, or growing vegetables for a company. I mean, that's really what these application processes want to see. They don't want to hear about you concocted the best strain on the West Coast and you sold $1 million worth of weed in 2 weeks. Like, you can't write any of that on an application. So I think that I definitely had some people in the beginning that thought like, oh man, I could hook you up. I can get you. How much you paying for pounds? I could get, I'd be like, look, everything is tracked, seed to sale. Like literally from the time when the plant starts popping up out the ground, they make you put a tag on it.
Right.
And they track it all the way to the point it gets to the customer. So at no point in that chain can you break it. Yeah.
So I know every time that you do an interview, you're gonna hear this. And it's probably got to the point where you're like, and I noticed too from watching some of your interviews that your stance on this actually kind of changed. But do you still have the title, the youngest African American female dispensary owner in America?
Yes.
And how do you feel about that?
I do. I've probably like the last year or so, I've really just gotten to the point where I don't want the title anymore. Like I'm like, darn, somebody hasn't taken it from me yet. I feel like.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because the industry is getting significantly more sophisticated. Every year, it's like we're growing. People say in the cannabis industry, it's like dog years, you know? So like 1 year in, that means that I'm means I'm a real OG in the game, for real. But I mean, the industry is just evolving so fast, and I think some of the players, like some of the big multi-state operators that are on the Canadian Stock Exchange and worth millions and millions and millions of dollars, when I was getting started in 2014, 2015, they had one license just like me. And then now fast forward to 2020, and they these are some of them billion-dollar companies. So just the competition level has become more fierce even. So it was already difficult because of the lack of information back in 2014, 2015. But now in 2020, there's still a lack of information, but a little bit more coming out. But now the players that are playing the game, they've gotten way stronger. So it's just more difficult to compete with them. And really, you got to partner with them. That's really the way in now.
So is anybody dominating right now?
Yeah, there are a few people that are definitely dominating. I'd say in the U.S., everyone's heard of like MedMen, and we're seeing them kind of crash and burn a little bit right now. We're seeing a company, High Times is a media company, but they're getting into the retail space. They just bought a bunch of dispensaries from another big company called Harvest. I mean, and Harvest is in my state, Maryland. There's another company that was founded in Chicago, GTI, Green Thumb Industries, and I think they're a very well-run company. They're in Maryland. You know, I think now we're just starting to see, like, you know, okay, these are starting to be the big boys. And even out of the big boys, some of them are going to fail too. We're seeing that a lot of people, they raised a lot of money in like 2018. The capital markets in cannabis were on fire. And 2019, we saw that dry up because the operations weren't there. So a lot of companies were good at winning licenses, but they're not good at running the companies once they get the license.
So it's kind of like a formula to get the license.
It's definitely a formula, and once you crack that code, I mean, I know a guy that he writes applications for people. Oh, he's winning left and right. He just figured it out. Like, but it's very difficult. But if you can figure out how the regulators want to see it,
how often do they change it?
So the application processes are different in every state. So that's the first thing. And they normally so I've seen a few states have multiple processes.
So this guy this guy you're talking about, he writes for multiple states or
multiple states.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but I mean there's like a basic level that every application is going to have. You know, every application is going to ask about property, and they're going to want to see some type of site plan. Every application is going to ask about your security measures. They're going to want to know what type of equipment you're going to use. And it's really a skill to be able to communicate all of these things in a way that a regulator will be able to read it and clearly understand it. That's the skill. Because a lot of people, I mean, the information, I always say it's kind of like these applications are like open book tests that are graded on a bell curve. And somebody has to win and someone has to lose. Like, I don't care if we all write the same thing. Like, someone has to win and someone has to lose. So, I mean, sometimes it can get down to, like, the way you're putting pictures with the words.
Really?
And I mean, because, like, those little things, imagine you're grading these applications, you're reading, like, thousands of them. And let's say you can only pick 10 and you have 1,000 to read. Like, you're going to probably gravitate to the ones that are simplest to read, but have the most dense information.
So it's thousands of applications going on, and is it like one committee or commission or?
Normally there's a commission or a department from, you know, some type of offset of like the Department of Health or Agriculture in whatever state normally. Like I said, sometimes they'll have the commission. Normally the commission or the departments that run these programs are not the ones grading. They normally hire some type of third-party company to grade. And oftentimes like an accounting firm to really go through and audit the process. And a lot of times they'll go back and then have a third-party audit the way that the process was. Because a lot of, I mean, as you can imagine, if thousands of people are applying for like 70 licenses, let's say. Chicago is going to announce 75 new dispensary licenses sometime soon. And I think 4,000 applications went in for 75.
Now, I would imagine, are people allowed to apply for multiple licenses at once? Like, can you apply for a license in Maryland and California at the same time?
Definitely. So, you can be applying everywhere you'd like. At the same time, in each specific state, they might have restrictions around how many you can own. So, you know, you might be able, and really how many you can apply for as well, because in Illinois, you can be, you can have some type of financial interest on up to 10 dispensary licenses. So, you know, some people might have put in 100 applications knowing that they can only win 10 potentially, but they're just trying to increase their chances.
Right. So let's say somebody has $30,000 to disperse, right, to this specific want. Would you recommend that they spread that, if they don't mind, right, of course, spread their money out and apply in multiple states, or would you have them focus on one state?
Well, if all that you had was $30,000 to put towards the whole process, or just the application itself, not all the things you have to do to get the application ready.
Correct.
Okay, so just the application itself, I would definitely say spread that out. So application fees normally range anywhere between like $1,500 and $5,000, maybe $10,000. I don't even know if I've seen them go up to $10,000. I think $5,000 is pretty much the biggest application fee I've seen. But then I know people that to increase their chances, let's say there's a, they're limiting the amount in each senatorial district. So maybe you can apply, you can put in one application for each district. Yeah, knowing that you might only be able to win one, right? I know people that would put in an application for every single district. So you have to make that decision, but I would definitely spread out that 30,000 probably between like 2 or 3 states.
So I want to double back to what we were talking about, dominating the industry. So for a company to dominate the industry, I know you mentioned companies are buying up dispensary shops. Is that how they're dominating the industry, or are there other ways?
Yeah, I think what is showing dominance right now in cannabis is when you've been able to create full infrastructures in multiple states. So the companies that I'm seeing do the best have created brands that they can produce over and over again, which is hard to do in cannabis because it's not like you can use one production center and send it out all over the country. You have to have different production centers in every state that sometimes have different rules and regulations that they have to follow in each one.
Yeah.
So the companies that are really dominating have been able to create brands that they can create consistent products for in individual states. And yes, at first, domination was definitely shown by how many licenses you had, wherein I think now people are looking more to operational excellence. So you're seeing a lot of companies that had licenses everywhere kind of consolidate to certain states.
Sense, yeah.
They're saying, all right, I'm gonna focus on, XYZ states because, or, I'm gonna focus just on California because it's the biggest cannabis market right now. Or I'm gonna focus on California, Florida, and Illinois for whatever reason. And you're seeing them sell a lot of their assets in other states that they find are not key markets so that they can focus on that. And I think that gives opportunity to a lot of people in their local markets to really just focus there. And we've kind of even changed our strategy from caring about being in as many places as possible to really dominating in Maryland and on the East Coast, especially in the north, as a lot of states are going to come on board in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. How do you guys determine which route you're going to go? Do you guys pay attention to market trends? Are you guys paying attention to any of that stuff?
Definitely. Yeah. So, we definitely do a lot of data tracking. We're looking at trends and what's happening, what states are coming on board. Some of my favorite tools are from BDS Analytics, also New Frontier Data. And I know the people who founded both of those companies. That's the other cool thing in cannabis. I mean, since everything's so new, I pretty much know all the major players. And I remember when they were startup companies and, we've been able to grow together. So I have a lot of resources on that front. And, that's why I'm always trying to explain to people what's really happening in cannabis, because I get what you see. You see that, oh, wow, it's becoming legal everywhere. I'm like, it's not legal everywhere. In some places, it's a very limited amount of access. Like Virginia has a program, but it's a low THC oil program, so everyone knows that CBD and hemp, CBD derived from hemp is cannabis that is lower than 0.03% Delta 9 THC, which means Delta 9 means non-activated THC. In Virginia, so they say have a medical marijuana program, but no flower sales, so they can't sell smokable flower like people are used to. And they can only sell products with less than, I believe it's 5% THC in it, which is higher than the hemp-derived CBD, but still it's a high CBD, very low THC product. New York is the same way. They have a medical program, but there's no flower sales there. Can't sell flowers. So you really have to understand the market, but there's so much opportunity because of all of these nuanced laws and the fact that they're ever changing.
Speaking of such, how can somebody get involved if it's illegal in their state?
Yeah, if it's illegal in your state, you need to be involved in the regulatory process. I promise you they're probably talking about cannabis from a regulatory standpoint, from a legislative standpoint. So you need to be setting meetings with your local government officials, with your senators and your representatives, and you need to be talking to them about what the program should look like in your state. And also, really be working to make sure that those things that you're suggesting have proven results. You have plenty of case studies of states where things have worked out very well, and sometimes where things didn't work out so well. We remember Oregon at one point was having such a bad issue because they pretty much had open licensing. If you meet basic requirements, you could open up a store. I mean, they had thousands of dispensaries, and it got to the point where the product was so undervalued.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you're selling a pound. I think they were selling pounds for like $500 and less, $100.
Yeah.
And that's just not a sustainable. People can't, sustain their business in a market like that.
So I heard you say pound a couple times. So what's the most amount of cannabis that people actually go, I guess you call them patients, right? That,
In a medical,
right.
state.
That patients actually come, is Maryland medical?
Maryland's just medical now, but
Right.
consumers, patients, yeah.
Yeah, so what's the most amount that they actually buy at a time, typically?
Some states, pretty much every state, especially medical states, have limits on how much you can purchase at once.
Really?
In Maryland, it's 120 grams on a 30-day rolling basis.
Gotcha.
So every time you buy cannabis, it's taken from your allotment every 30, every day. Every 30 days, that allotment is added back to what you can buy at that time, and it's tracked across every dispensary.
Wow. So if somebody is buying 120 grams, do people max it out?
A lot of people don't max it out in one visit.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen that a lot. I might have like 2 or 3 patients.
What's
Honestly,
120
that do that.
grams? Or it
That's
kinda
about,
depends, right?
it's like 4 ounces, a little less than 4 ounces.
Because you guys have different strains, and different strains cost different amounts, but it's kind of like in the same ballpark, really?
Yeah, I'd say that an eighth out of a dispensary, no matter where you are, is going to run you anywhere between $30 and $60, and probably closer to like the $50 range.
This is an odd question, but do people who own cannabis dispensary shops, do they ever focus on street prices and like
Of
being
course.
competitive street prices?
I get that all the time. They're like, well, on the street, I'm like, they don't have overhead. They don't have they don't go through. I'm always like, you better call Ray Ray back up. Because, I mean, that ain't never happening here. But, I mean, it will. The prices will normalize. I like to compare, I like to look to the West Coast and what they've done because they're ahead, So even in like Colorado, when they went recreational, like at this point, when you go in a Colorado dispensary, you can get some really, really good cannabis for like $40, which is comparable, I feel like, to street prices. Yeah, some people might have the hookup and all that stuff, but you also don't know what you're getting, where you're getting it from for real.
Yeah.
They could tell you it's anything. It could be sprayed with anything. Now I'm like super bougie when it comes to my weed. I'm not smoking stuff off the street because I don't know how it's been grown and any of that. And the people selling it normally don't know any of that stuff. So I really like to know, I want to know everything that is going in my body. And that's why I really like that. Anyone that compares, street prices to the dispensary, I'm always like, you can gladly go back out there to the street because that's not, you know what I mean? I feel like you can't even compare the two. And I even tell people I'm not competing with the street.
Right.
The people who come to the dispensary probably would never buy off the street. So.
Yeah. Do you even see people still buy off the streets? Like just from being around, do you still buy off the street?
Definitely. I still see it a lot. I think that because, especially like in states like California, they put a crazy excise tax on the plant. So let's say it's affordable, but if you have a 32% tax on top of it, I mean, it just gets to be a little ridiculous. So I think that's the biggest problem. In Cali, I mean, they even have it where the local jurisdictions will put tax. So you have like the state tax you're paying, and then you might pay a LA city tax. And I mean, it just gets to be a little outrageous. So I get it. Because legal cannabis is very expensive, and you can't utilize, even from a medical perspective, healthcare at all. So it's not like you can use your insurance to get your medicine like you would from a pharmacy. But these are all things that we're lobbying for and that we're trying to get changed because especially, I mean, people really use cannabis for medicinal reasons. And I know some people, like, that's hard for them to conceptualize, but a lot of people have a much better quality of life as they're going through different treatments, like cancer treatments and other illnesses that they're having to recover from. And some people use it for preventative measures. Some people use it to directly treat specific ailments like arthritis and even Crohn's disease, all types of different ailments. So they should be able to utilize insurance money to pay for these things just like they would regular medicines.
Now, do you find that you guys consult with actual doctors?
Yeah.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, so we work with actual doctors.
Yeah.
Actually, the state of Maryland has required that, doctors that want to give prescriptions go through a training and they sign up. So a lot of states, they do that. They have doctors sign up directly through their commission or whatever it might be that's governing their cannabis program. And they tell, that's where people go to get their recommendation. It's never called a prescription in cannabis. It's a recommendation. They don't prescribe.
Gotcha. Now, in these states, have you found that doctors are just like, hey, okay, you got a crook in your neck, here goes a license?
Some, and some are not. I think for some people it's a business model as well, and it's a lucrative one. Because oftentimes those consultations cost anywhere between $50 and $250.
Interesting.
So it's definitely, that's another business opportunity. Honestly, signing people up. My first consultant that I ever hired in the industry, she got started by signing people up in District of Columbia because they came on before Maryland. So then when Maryland came on, she easily moved into that market. So, that's also a really good business model to go through too.
So, being an independent dispensary store, when it comes to a shortage, what happens? Because I know those guys are going to eat first, right? You guys are not going to be the one who actually gets to reap the benefits if they don't know you, or if you're not within there. What is it? What do they call it?
Yeah, so being vertically integrated really gives you that opportunity to control every level of the supply chain. So of course, let's say there is a shortage. Let's say it's a really hot summer and a lot of cultivators had, lost their first crop because they didn't adjust temperatures properly in their indoor grows. Let's say that. And then there's a shortage in your state. Of course, if you're a cultivator and you have a dispensary, you're going to focus on your own dispensary first. Independent dispensary that's not associated with a grower or processor is going to have a difficult time getting product. And also, they're probably going to get price gouged because if they do want product, that's going to be taking away from the cultivator's retail shop to give it to them. So, when you are independent, you do have that problem, and it's best to cultivate relationships, no pun intended, but it's best to cultivate relationships with cultivators and processors early on and get contracts in place so that even when a shortage or anything of the sort comes up, that you have that worked out for your business. And that's how I've kind of found success working around the fact that we are not vertically integrated.
So has the ultimate goal within the cannabis industry been defined as like where somebody should be at, or where somebody wants to be at the top of the cannabis industry? Has that already been defined?
No, I feel like the closest thing to it probably is so Canopy Growth a few years ago did a $4 million. They got a $4 million investment from Constellation Brands, essentially positioning Constellation when it comes time to be a huge player in the cannabis space. And, they're in the beer and wine industry. So I think that's probably one of the bigger standards in the industry. But, when a lot of people think of the cannabis industry, they're not even thinking on that level. They're just thinking like, oh, I'm going to open up a shop. And I'm like, no, this big boy business. These people are doing $5 billion transactions.
Yeah.
This is a big deal.
Yeah. Speaking about that, just take it back just a little bit, because I know this is probably one of the easiest things, but a lot of people struggle with stuff like this in any business, not even just the cannabis industry. But how should somebody go about choosing a name?
Yeah, so in cannabis, you got to be really careful with choosing a name, because you definitely want to find a name that embodies your culture and the feeling you're trying to put out by your product or your retail brand. But at the same time, within cannabis, you need to make sure that it's something that can be compliant as well, because in a lot of states they have restrictions around it being, if something seems like it could be marketed to kids, states will block that. Even sometimes if you're trying to set up bank accounts, things like that, if the name sounds too much like a cannabis company, you could run into a lot of problems. So you got to be careful enough to pick a name that can be attractive to customers and also embody the culture and the mission behind your brand. But at the same time, it needs to be something that can be compliant across multiple states, especially if you have aspirations to be in multiple states. And then lastly, you got to almost anticipate the future when it becomes federally legal. Do you have a brand that can really have a strong national presence? Or did you name your dispensary, Atlanta's Finest? Atlanta's Finest, I mean, could be everywhere, but it's a little harder to take it to different places. So I think that's kind of key when choosing your name.
No, absolutely. Gotcha. And how involved is the government? Because I know that the industry is actually scrutinized, but in your experience, how involved has the government been in making sure that companies are in compliance? Yeah,
so most state governments form some type of committee or commission, and they are the ones in charge of governing it. They are very, very involved. To the point where you'll get random inspections, you'll have planned inspections, and they're going to have their checkbooks out, and they will be taking inventory of everything. A lot of states they make their reprimands public, so you can see kind of what some companies have been dinged for, and I mean, it's small stuff. I think people sometimes, they're like, oh, well, this is happening, but it's not a big deal. Or when we package, we don't always log every time we clean after we are packaging a pound up. I'm like, no, you actually, if you don't, kind of like in the healthcare industry, if you don't log it, it didn't happen. And you can be fined for that. Sometimes in some instances you can be suspended or have your license revoked for small things like that. So compliance is I'd argue that it is the most important part of the industry at this point right now, and it's heavily enforced.
And why do some companies get shut down?
I think most companies get shut down just because they're not paying attention to compliance. They're not following their own standard operating procedures. They may not have developed any too robust to be a robust program that can really happen. However, most states, before you even get licensed, you have to write these SOPs and have them approved, and you're constantly being quizzed on them and things like that. So a lot of companies, they have that down. Most of the ones that do get shut down is normally because of just normal like business markets and their business just failed. But if not, it's always a question of compliance after that.
I heard cannabis companies can't file for bankruptcy.
Right. Wow. Because we're federally illegal, technically we can't file for bankruptcy. There's a lot of things that we can't do. We can't write off normal business expenses like other companies. So there's a tax implication. It's called 280E of the Internal Revenue Code. That means that pretty much we cannot write off payroll. We can't write off our rent expense. We can't write off our marketing expenses. None of those. All we can write off is our cost of goods sold. As a cultivator or a processor, you have more of a cost of goods sold there because you're not directly selling to a consumer. Where in a retail dispensary, you have to get really creative with, okay, well, we only sell cannabis out of, this 500 square foot part of our 3,000 square foot building. So, you have to get really nuanced to figure that out. Because if not, you're essentially paying taxes on like 80% of your revenue, which is unheard of in any industry. Most businesses, you can get more in taxes than you make in a month in the cannabis industry.
Really?
It becomes very difficult. Part of the name of the game at this point is being able to survive until federal legalization or some sort of banking action is put into place. So there was a bill that was introduced and passed through the House on the federal level called the Safe Banking Act. And, even through all of the relief funds and all of these new relief bills that are being passed, they've reopened the conversation around allowing for cannabis to be treated like any other business from a banking and finance perspective. So I think that that's something that will move the industry mountains, if we are able to utilize regular banking and tax implications. Right now we're like living on an island having to figure stuff out on our own, and a lot of companies have been audited because of this. So we can't file bankruptcy. So when your company starts failing, you just got to flail all the way down to the bottom. And that's really scary
Yeah.
for a lot of people. The risk tolerance that you need to have to be in this industry is extremely high.
Yeah. Now, see, you got CBD, right? It's real big right now. A lot of people are talking about CBD.
Yeah.
And it's often in the same conversation as cannabis. You can't actually sell CBD at a dispensary, or is it state by state?
Every state is different,
Yeah.
and most states do allow for you to sell CBD derived from hemp
Yeah, okay.
products, because we sell CBD products that have THC in them as well, and
So does-
low THC.
So does CBD have THC in it, or does THC have CBD in it? How does that work?
So they're both called cannabinoids,
Okay,
right? There are hundreds of cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. We just focus on THC and CBD the most. Those are the ones we have the most research on. And THC is the only one that gives you that, euphoric psychoactive feeling.